Welcome back. Now, global risk consultants, Control Risks, have released the latest RiskMap report, which focuses on annual forecasts of political and security risks worldwide. Now, the first risk is U.S. geopolitics, with a drama surrounding political campaigns likely to heavily influence the risk landscape for businesses. The second is the judgment from civil society that expects businesses to be receptive to social values, employees, as well as community interest. The third one is the rise of cyber warfare, which has seen assault on critical infrastructure and global connectivity. After that comes global economic growth that analysts predict will be dismally low. This, of course, will in turn affect the cost of inaction due to high political instability. And lastly, strategic leadership, under which experts believe businesses need to adopt strategies that resonate with an intensely tactical world. Well, of course, we'll put that all together for you. And to paint a clear picture of what exactly are the risks that lie ahead for Africa's investment landscape, especially, we're joined by Control Risk East Africa specialist. Her name is Patricia Rodrigues. Great to have you with us on the show, Patricia.
Thank you for having me.
And now, looking at your report, you said you expect a tougher set of challenges in 2020 than we've seen to date. Now, a lot of that involves the relationship between politics and economics going forward. Give us a sense of what risk and opportunity as well does this pose for Africa as a continent going forward?
Sure. So one of the things that we've highlighted is this growing link between political and economic affairs, especially on the side of Western actors and more bigger geopolitical actors. So in Africa, this translates into a number of things. On one hand, it can be quite risky to do business. We are starting to see Western actors, for example, using economic sanctions as a tool. And on top of that, we also have growing populism within Western communities, which can translate into some very difficult business environments for African companies that are looking to export to some of these markets, which are increasingly prioritizing their own businesses. So on one hand, there are these risks for people who are looking to export. On the other hand, it can actually be a boon for the African investment landscape. So with all this geopolitical competition, you're actually starting to see competition in terms of investment flows. So if we look at the Horn of Africa, for example, we are not only seeing interest from Western actors, we are also seeing China playing a very big role, as well as countries from the Middle East. So it's a bit of both, really.
Now, you mentioned populism, protectionism, sanctions as well. Those are some of the major obstacles that, of course, businesses will be facing as they try to navigate global markets and supply chains. How do you think the recently signed Africa Continental Free Trade Area will feature in all of this?
So I think that's a really positive story for Africa. So while we're seeing, I suppose, the closing up of some of these economies elsewhere, Africa is seeming to move towards a more open, a more integrated economy as a continent. So it's a really positive story. But I think we need to temper this optimism with a heavy dose of realism. So while we're seeing countries signing up to these agreements, we're also seeing countries that are a bit more hesitant to engage with them. So Nigeria is a very good example, because while it has recently ratified some of these protocols, it has also closed its borders with some of its neighbors. So we are seeing at least the political sentiment, the political will, but when it comes to implementation, I think this is where Africa still has a long way to go.
All right. Now, you also point to technology and data as greatly changing the way we do business going forward. Give us a sense of what role you think they will play in terms of risk and reward going forward.
Okay, so in the African continent, I think technology is a very important facilitator of economic growth. I like to point to Ethiopia, where we're starting to see the telecoms market being opened up to foreign investment. If you think about the potential economic opportunity there, it's pretty large. We have a population of over 100 million people who, with better access to telecoms, will be able to be more integrated not only in the global economy, but will also have access to things like financial services, which has been a problem in places like Ethiopia. But we also do have to be cognizant of some of the risks involved. We are increasingly starting to see, larger geopolitical players with the ability to conduct potentially harmful attacks against different players in the cyberspace. We also have rising regulation. In Kenya, we've just recently passed data protection laws, for example. So it's a bit difficult for companies to try and navigate these two potential fronts where you have cyber being linked to geopolitical concerns, but also governments who are increasingly trying to regulate and legislate around some of the technology space.
All right. Now, an interesting part of your report is you say despite a somewhat gloomy outlook on a number of fronts, many of your clients remain set for growth in the months ahead. That seems like a cautiously optimistic outlook. How so? Give us a sense of how so.
I think the best companies will always be prepared for whatever comes their way. So it's all about having an understanding of the environment you're operating in, both domestic and global, putting in place internal protocols that enable you to respond to whatever geopolitical or economic crisis, and then being actually able to implement them when the time comes. So it's in sum, it's all about preparation.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us in this studio. Thank you for your insights. Of course, that was Patricia Rodrigues. She is a Control Risk East Africa specialist.